So it's been 100 days since Ontario elected its first Green MPP, and we're here with leader Mike Schreiner to ask him how the first 100 days have gone. So Mike, first question, if there was a book about Ford's first 100 days in office, what would you call it?
I'd call it an attack on the modern world, whether it's taking the sex ed curriculum back to the last century or completely dismantling Ontario's climate change plan. This government has really attacked the modern Ontario that we've built.
How have you, as Ontario's first Green MPP, been able to have an impact here at Queen's Park?
Well, I think I've had a big impact, just the kinds of questions I've asked, the statements I've made on the floor, the work I've done with other MPPs. But I think probably the biggest time we've driven the news cycle here was when I asked the minister why the government broke its promise to cancel the basic income pilot. They campaigned saying they would keep it, and then they've canceled it. And that caused a media storm that ultimately the minister said, you know, that was fake news. But we actually proved that the government did say that they would keep the basic income pilot. And this government likes to say promise made, promise kept. In this case, it was a promise made and a promise broken. What
has been your most memorable moment in the first 100 days?
You know, it probably our all-night sitting. That doesn't happen very often at Queen's Park, and so the fact that, you know, we started sitting at midnight on a Sunday night or first thing Monday morning, however you want to look at it, and we sat in that chamber and we heard protesters outside the building all night long as we debated the government interfering in the middle of the Toronto elections to reduce the size of Toronto City Council.
Is there something that the government did that you particularly agree with in the first 100 days?
Yeah, you know, I'm glad you asked that, because there's been a lot of things I've disagreed with, but the one thing I have agreed with is the new approach to cannabis legalization. I never felt that the previous government's 40 government-run monopoly stores would do anything to combat the illegal, unsafe underground market and get organized crime out of the cannabis trade. And the new government's legislation, which I voted in favor of actually today at second reading, I think shifts direction, and I think, you know, licensing and highly regulating private dispensaries across the province is the best way to combat the unsafe, illegal underground market.
And what about the worst thing this government has done?
Well, I think the worst thing is just the dismantling of Ontario's climate change plans. I mean, the plans the previous government put in place were inadequate, but at least there was a plan. This government, to completely dismantle it with having no alternative plan in place, is irresponsible and short-sighted, and is doing a disservice to the people of Ontario and future generations.
Okay, and last question. What message would you like to send to Premier Ford and his government as we head into the next 100 days?
You know what, I challenge this premier to start acting like a premier. The campaign is over, it's time to start governing. This government has really spent the first 100 days talking about how they're going to tear Ontario down, how they're going to dismantle what the previous government did. It's time now to start talking about how do we build Ontario up, what's the kind of Ontario we want moving forward.
Thanks, Mike.
Absolutely.